Sky Father. I'm going to open in a moment with Kevin Stroud at the History of English podcast, where he's going to explain how Zeus becomes our Sky Father. And we'll do this because language and how it is developed will play a very large role in understanding the characters in this course. We're going to maneuver back and forth amongst what are known as Indo-European root languages, and in particular, Sanskrit, German, Latin, and especially Greek in these videos. Because by recognizing the Indo-European root connection, we can assign electrical equivalents in one language's character and add those distinctions and definitions to the gods in other language characters. And we can do that so they all relate properly in the Cataclysm. There's much to be learned by breaking down our lesson into three parts. And that first part is, what is the god's name and what does it tell us? The second part that we will look at is, where do we find these gods? Some are up in the skies, some are in the heavens, some are below ground. And then the last part is, what actions or what abilities does that God have? This will be the fulcrum of our thesis for these videos. Click that like, share, and subscribe button for me, and I hope you enjoy this brand new series. Welcome to Mythology 101, Zeus, defining the Sky Father.
Welcome to episode 2 of the History of English podcast. In this episode, we're going to look at the oldest known ancestor of English, the ancient language known as Indo-European, or technically speaking, the Proto-Indo-European language. You will recall that earlier I mentioned that English has the word father and Latin has the word pater, and both words came from the same original source word. The Greek version of the word is very similar to Latin and is also pronounced pater. The Sanskrit version of the word is pitar. So pitar, pater, pater, and father. You can start to see how linguists realized that the P sound shifted to an F sound in the Germanic languages. But let's hold off on that until a future episode. In addition to having a very similar word for father in all of these languages, they also shared a compound word for God, which also used the word father. The term was literally sky father. In Sanskrit, it was Diospitar. In Greek, it was Zoopater. And in Latin, it was Eupater. And that Greek version of the word, Zoopater, later became simply Zeus after the pater part was dropped. And the Latin version of the word, Eupater, later became Jupiter after another sound shift changed the Y sound to a J sound.
Thunder and lightning are usually the first things associated with Zeus. But in reality, Zeus is first and foremost Sky Father. No thunder and no lightning. We've got sky and we've got father. That's it. Zeus as a name begins with Z, which in German is a gender-neutral pronoun. In other words, although we associate Zeus with a male, Z, the root of Zeus, like the root of 0, is fundamentally neutral. It's neither male nor female. We'll see this again in a moment when we look at the Sanskrit and Latin versions. The Z of our God is fundamentally neutral. Lock that in. The us of Zeus brings up a somewhat obvious question not asked, which is whether there was only one Zeus showing up in multiple stories, or if it's possible we're talking about a different Zeus, us, with identical characters showing up in different stories within mythology. When researching for this series, it seemed generally agreed upon that despite being the father of all gods and mankind on earth, other gods, in particular Kronos, held a superior position to him in the story. So it can be said, sometimes Zeus is the superior god, such as over the gods of man and earth, and sometimes Zeus is an inferior god, such as Kronos, who eats his children, and Zeus, who escaped not because he was more powerful, but because his father swallowed a rock. The clear implication of the story being that Zeus can be destroyed by whatever Kronos represents, which we're going to get to in a future video, I'm sure. There are two models that might offer some clarity when considering the us. Campus, when plural, is campuses, and octopus, when plural, is spelled octopi. Is it campuses and Zeuses, or is it octopi and Xi? Remember the three examples. In Sanskrit, it was Dias Peter. In Greek, it was Zupater. And in Latin, it was Iupiter. Di, Xi, and an actual I. In Greek, like the eye of octopi, the eye of the matter seems distinct enough to say that Di, Xi, and Iu are indicating a single grouping of a thing. There are multiple octopi in the ocean, and there are multiple occurrences of Z in mythology. There's a story about an octopus, and there is a story about a Zeus. In this way, Zeus is both the same character in each tale and actually a completely different manifestation each time of the same principal force, a Z. But what is Zeus? An article from the Lawrence Livermore Labs gives us a nice tidy explanation in their article, Coming Through in a Pinch, because all indications are that the Zeus character of mythology is a Z pinch, sometimes called a Z pinch or a 0 point, and they have a machine that creates the Z pinch so it can be studied. Quote, in its simplest form, a Z pinch device uses the electrical current in a plasma to generate a magnetic field that compresses the plasma, or pinches it down. The Z designation refers to the direction of the current in the device, the Z-axis, in an X, Y, Z, three-dimensional coordinated space. In other words, the Z of the name Zeus is indicating that there was a Z pinch, forming a 0 point, as indicated by the gender-neutral nature of Z in the German language tradition. Z is the 0 designation and axis indicator point of a Z pinch that occurred in the Cataclysm. The purpose of Zeus is to tell us that there was a Z pinch and to show us the direction of the current at the pinch, as we'll see in a moment. When we look at Zeus from that perspective, Zeus would specifically refer to the area at the very center of these rotating balls around the waist of a plasma stability. This association of a plasma stability with this squatter man has already been made by Dr. Anthony Pratt. What we're looking at is current and induced magnetic field rotation and the creation of a 0 point. Zeus is a 0 point defining the direction of the current. And when we look at Zeus from that distinction, the Sanskrit and Latin names come deeply into focus and not only confirm the thesis, but add detail. In Sanskrit, Dias once again breaks into di and us, with di being a verb indicating action in Sanskrit. Zeus was an action. Similarly, di, or die as we know it in Greek, is an indication of two, a distinction we'll see in the Latin version we'll explore in just a moment. The two is important because if we are dealing with a 0 point, there will also be two other points, those being the input and the output around the Zeus point. Capture that idea for just a moment, because the Latin version gives us the IU, which is actually pronounced that way. And when we see this in electrical terminology, it's IO, representing input and output. Iupiter is the inputter and the outputter, represented by the distinction of the Zeus pater, or 0 point, distinguishing the direction of current. Inputter, outputter, Zeusputter. So if Zeus is fundamentally neutral, then why do we recognize him as male? The simple answer is that his thunder and lightning mean that he represents an electrical force, and therefore all male characters in our Greek mythology are related to the electrical force in their role. So that would mean that fundamentally all female characters, as we will see in our next video on Zeus's wife Hera, represent the corresponding magnetic field to the electrical force. Male, female. Where do we find Zeus? Well, in the Medusa story, he's Zeus, so he's Zeus Pater, He's our sky father. Zeus was a Z-pinch that occurred above the earth, yet close enough to the earth to be considered in the sky and not the heavens. What did Zeus do in the story of Medusa? He sent his son Perseus to save Athena. And Athena in mythology, as we will later see, is the earth. These positions are already well established by scholars. The story is about a current between Venus and the earth. And what Zeus is telling us is which direction the current was flowing at the Zeus point. Zeus, pater, 0 point. And that 0 point, by the way, was flowing from the Father, the Sky Father, to the earth, or Athena in mythology. Had Zeus sent Perseus to save Medusa instead, then we would not be here today. Thank you so much for loving us, Zeus Pater. Peace.